traded my freedom for power before.
The light will heal your scars.
I am my scars!
The light is your destiny.
My destiny is mine!
I seem to have a bad habit with this series of knowing what I want to talk about, and then feeling obligated to talk about something else. I've been getting a lot of comments on my videos, and by the way, I'm incredibly thankful that so many people take the time to give me feedback on my videos. Whether you guys tell me you love it or you hate it, your engagement makes all of this worthwhile. So thank you. Many of these comments have made me realize that there is likely a very drastic disconnect between me and many of those who enjoy my content, or at least take the time to watch my content. The more of these comments I see, the more I realize that I feel very differently than most people in the MMO community about class identity in general. A great number of people like to argue that class identity is important because of balance. I'm not going to refute that. You're right. In much the same way that it is easier to do a puzzle when all of the pieces have their own designated spot within the frame, it is easier to design a more balanced class system when all of the abilities within a game have their own designated classes and specializations. When there is no overlap, you get a very clear picture of what everything is supposed to look like. It's a strong foundation, and this makes it much easier for developers to build upward with less risk of breaking the game. And it's right around here that I start to disagree with the mantra, class identity is important. Now, I'm not saying it should be thrown out the window. Every class that has ever been designed in any game will fall somewhere under the Holy Trinity, so you can never truly do away with class identity. Every single one that has ever been designed has fallen under at least one of these three categories, and in order for them to have a purpose or a useful function in a traditional MMO, they would have to. Unfortunately, any class concept beyond the raw functionality of the Holy Trinity starts to get a little dicey. When you have a class that can do more than one of these at the same time, you technically have an unbalanced class. Think of each one of these three as a class. You have tanks. They do meaningless damage, but they can take lots of damage. You have damage dealers, or DPS. They can deal lots of damage, but they can't take lots of damage. Then you have healers. They also do meaningless damage and can't take lots of damage, but they can undo or prevent damage that people take. Each one has a very clear strength and a very clear weakness. If any of these classes had any of the other classes' strengths in addition to their own, that class would be considered overpowered, and then in turn would be unbalanced. Now, I don't know about you, but I would never play a game where the only three classes are the skin and bones Holy Trinity. That would be the most boring thing ever, which is why every MMO since the dawn of time has had more classes than that. However, this means that in every single MMO that has ever been released, in PvE you have classes that become irrelevant, and in PvP you have classes that become hyper-dominant. Now, I don't know what you think of when you think of balance in an MMO or a MOBA, but this is the reality of it. It is not an attainable goal. It is an ideal that will always be strived for, but never achieved, and you shouldn't want it to be. In order to successfully, perfectly balance a game, it would have to be perfectly equal on all sides, even the sides or classes that you add in between these core three. No one wants to play a game where everyone is the same, and it is because of this that various classes will ultimately be better than others at various times. There will always be a funnel of players that follow the flavor of the month around religiously, because they don't want to play the game at a quote-unquote disadvantage, or rather always want to have an edge over other players that maybe cannot put in the same amount of time. But this is not a balance issue. This funnel exists no matter how close to balanced a game gets, because people that play MMOs will always be leaning towards min-maxing. A lot of players do not have the opportunity to sacrifice all of the time they have put into a character so that they can hard pivot to a class or playstyle that the meta favors. Again, this is not a balance issue. Balance, as we've already established, is an unattainable ideal. It is my unprofessional opinion that this is a creativity issue. This is a design issue. This is an issue that I feel starts at the core of game design. It starts with class identity. There are many good reasons for players to hop around from class to class. But I think we can all agree that it's a bad thing when players swap classes due to an obvious imbalance of power. How do you mitigate this? I'll be honest, I have some ideas. Now, I don't know for sure, but I'm almost positive the answer is not to start building a game by organizing all of the game's potentially accessible abilities into these little fucking inaccessible boxes called classes, and then justifying making the abilities inaccessible because of something called class identity. If a game is so much easier to balance and build content around, when all of the classes have all of their own unique abilities that give them their identity, why is every game always still unbalanced? What is the point of even designing classes if you cannot balance the abilities within them to make the class fair? Why do people insist that class system-based games are somehow still the right games to build when we clearly see all of the problems that they have? It is sad to me that players feel they have to trade their freedom for power. So many people just accept that the nature of MMOs is that each patch, certain classes will just be better, and if you don't play one of those classes, then you cannot compete. I get that feeling, and it sucks. It's a very real feeling. I genuinely think that it can change, or at least get better. One of the positive things Riot has accomplished with League of Legends is the wide variety of champions in their game that share similar abilities. You have champions in every class that are very mobile, have good poke or good CC, and champions in every class that don't have these things and are still viable. This wide variety can be a lot to learn up front, but it gives players the freedom to choose a more uniquely designed playstyle that might not always fit perfectly into one class. I think a big part of the problem that MMOs face is that when you put classes before abilities, it forces the player to adapt to the character they have made. When you put abilities before classes, it allows the player to adapt their character to the playstyle they enjoy the most. I've already talked about an example of this in a previous video, so if you haven't seen that one yet, I recommend checking it out. A system that affords its players more options to play the game the way they want to play it will inevitably be more difficult to balance. However, the difference between a more balanced game and a less balanced game is not how difficult it is to balance. The difference is in how often the game is updated, and how fast the game-breaking problems are dealt with. Having access to too many abilities or too many unique abilities would not break the game. That being said, I'm very well aware that a paladin that could shapeshift, turn invisible, and bubble himself would be really overpowered. This is why when designing talent trees, devs typically put the really strong abilities towards the end of a progression system. Talent trees are merely an example. But I still think having the opportunity to have access to all of these abilities at a reduced power or scale, or not all at the same time, is ultimately what future MMOs should shoot for. The point I'm trying to make here is I feel like people that play MMOs play them because the games typically afford more freedom of choice, yet we support and justify in our heads game design that is so restricting. These games are going to be unbalanced to varying degrees at various times anyway. That is the nature of this genre. The remedy for that is a company that actually monitors the imbalance of power frequently enough to catch mistakes or discoveries before it can negatively affect too many players' experiences. You might as well play a game that gives you more options so that the time you put into it can be leveraged in more ways even after you've been playing the game for years. I believe the way that we talk about class identity within the MMORPG community is very dated. With all of the unique champion designs that we've seen from Riot in League of Legends, I just find it hard to believe that they would balance an MMO around something that resembles any sort of class system we've seen before. Riot isn't trapped in a position where they have to build their universe around certain classes. They have created, built, and developed so much at this point that they've actually put themselves in a position to tailor their game to each individual player that wants to try it. I feel like they pride themselves on having something for everyone, whether it be in each individual game or by having a wide variety of titles in different genres. They have a habit of appealing to as many people as possible. I understand Riot is not trying to reinvent the wheel, and I think they've succeeded thus far as a company because of that. Many of their titles are far superior versions of games that already exist. Taking this into account, I don't think I've proposed anything in this series so far that Riot would struggle to pull off by any means. But just like the rest of the MMO community, all we can really do is wait and see. If you enjoyed this video, definitely hit that subscribe button. I've got more on the way, and I promise you won't be disappointed. Also, don't forget to tell me how much you hated this in the comments below. Really appreciate it. Helps me out a ton. Thanks, guys.